Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today we have Ed Muzio with us. Ed is the founder of Group Harmonics and a best-selling author. Ed, I'm just going to kick it over to you and let you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are and what you're doing today.
Yeah, for sure, Amos. Thank you, and happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. I started out as an engineer, worked about 10 years for Intel back when Intel was in this super big growth mode. They're having a hard time today, but it was a little different back then. And I've been doing this about 20 years. And what happened was I sort of noticed that as an engineer, I was always the guy in the room who was paying attention to how did the team structure work, how did the leadership work, how was decision-making handled. And so what that has evolved into for me is kind of a weird specialty around paying attention to how groups of people actually do execution. How do they get from, we have a strat plan, we have a thing we want to do, and now we're going to claw our way through it for the year. How do they get through that? And what I've learned and in my practice, what I have is, most of what you hear about like this meeting could have been an email is the bad version of that. And when we put people together in the right way to do things, you do a lot more, a lot faster, you can change a lot faster, and you can produce things that you couldn't produce alone. And so that's kind of my area. My book that you mentioned is Iterate, and that is kind of the research of what has to happen. And this goes back 7 decades at this point. And then my consulting practice is helping teams move to that way of working, because we all know that you can read a book and say, that sounds good, but getting the group, the leadership team, the executives, everyone to do it is not always as straightforward. And I work all the way down through middle management on that. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
So your book, and I find it interesting, typically what I hear is not iterate, but let me reiterate that for you. And I always chuckle and I tell my clients, if you're constantly finding yourself saying that I need to reiterate something, you probably didn't get it right the first time. Yeah.
Well, there's a nugget of truth in there, almost, because I think, part of what I mean by iterate is, it's from my engineering background. It's like we iterate toward the solution. We don't know the solution in advance. So that's how computers predict weather and, forecast traffic patterns and things. And what it means is you do only one incremental step and then you learn from it. So I always use the metaphor of I walk out the door of the office building, I look across the giant parking lot, I got to be to my car in 3 minutes to stay on schedule. And so I start walking in the direction I think my car is. And then what happens from there is pretty uninteresting, except that it's execution, right? So I take a step, I take a step, I take a step. As I'm going along, my feet, the workforce, are dealing with the surface without intervention from, upstairs, my brain, the executive group, right? At the same time, my brain and my upper body is looking forward and feeding information down. And I also have a cardiovascular system in the middle that's providing resources that my leg muscles can escalate to if they need more blood oxygen. And that escalation might get answered automatically, or it might get escalated further up to the top if it's too big a demand. And so you have all of these things kind of going on in parallel and these decisions getting made. And really all it is to say, now that we've taken a step, what have we learned that we should incorporate into the next step? So the surface is different, or, hey, that car I thought was mine is not mine. I should change direction, or there's an obstruction in the way, or this is harder going than we thought, or we're behind or ahead at a schedule. And so every step informs the next step. And that, I use that word for the book because that is what I observe to be kind of the defining difference between the 85% of companies that operate on what I call North American management, which is have meetings to talk about how it's going, and this other small population of companies that really outperform those by handling group work differently and by handling organization differently. And so that's where iterate comes from, but it's not the same as reiterate.
And I'm as you were talking, something kind of came to mind. So many times, let's take a manufacturing business. For instance, you have the people that are on the floor manufacturing the widgets, right? They're out there, they do the job. And so for the most part, they are kind of taking one step at a time. Like, okay, I need to make 5,000 units by the end of the day. So that means I'm going to, with downtime, lunch and this, I have 5 hours of work time. So that means I need to make 1,000 an hour, and I got to kind of track. And in the first hour, if I only make 800, that means I got to, do something better in the next 4 hours, so on and so forth. And oftentimes the person that hits that 5,000 every day we promote them to become a supervisor, then a manager, and maybe an executive someday if they're really lucky or unlucky. I'm not sure which way you want to look at that. And my point is, when they make that switch, all of a sudden it's like they don't have the ability to be able to convey. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are. When I have seen that, what I believe it comes back to is the ability. They can do the job really well, but they don't have the people skills to be able to communicate, to be able to tell someone else, here's how you do that. What are your thoughts on that process, from somebody kind of coming from, on the floor in a manufacturing plant, working their way up? Why do they so often either fail or run into roadblocks along the way?
Well, Amos, I want to go sideways for a second because you said something very brilliant, which is you described a situation where the person on the floor doing the work is tracking their own work and paying attention to their own output rate, and therefore can tell their boss if they're ahead or behind. And that's actually one of the 5 key behavioral practices at a high level that are going on in these high-performing organizations. So that's not a given. In a lot of organizations, that person is being told how they're doing.
Yes.
And so, we call plan, and, there's plan and forecast. And in that case, plan is what the boss tells me to do, and forecast is me repeating the plan back to the boss because he told me he doesn't want to hear anything else, right? So you're talking about a person that's in a good work situation. So that's actually something I work on when I work with organizations. To get back to your question, it's a really good point and something I think we've all seen a lot, which is you take that person who's good at that, is being managed in this case very well, and you move them up, and it's a different skill set. I don't know that I would say it's because they don't have people skills. I think I would say it's just a different set of activities you need to do. And because I have an engineering background, I work with a lot of technical companies and med tech and things like that, as well as manufacturing. And, what I find over and over again is we get these people that are in one way or another technically brilliant, whether it's they were good at getting their work done on the floor or whether it's they come with some kind of advanced degree or some kind of specialized degree. But, what that sort of automatically converts to, if you follow the culture of North American management, is it converts to use my expertise to try and tell these people what to do. And what I have learned from this big body of research is the job is not that. The job is create a group of people who are collaborating in some way to produce the higher level thing that I owe the organization, and then work with my peers to collaborate in such a way that we produce the higher level thing, so that we are clearly outcome focused, but also clearly future focused. We are not getting together to say, hey, Amos, you work for me. Did you do your stuff today? And then you do a tap dance of, yes, I did. We're getting together to say, hey, everybody, what do you see coming? And what should we do today about what you see coming? And that is, I think, one of the core differences of iterative management versus North American management. And I don't think it's surprising that whatever background they come in with, they don't have that, because you don't get it from the degree, you don't get it from the shop floor experience, and you certainly don't get it from watching pop culture, TV, and movies on management, because they're all doing it wrong, because it makes better TV to do it wrong. So not at all surprising, but you're absolutely right. They come in without the skills and without even the model for it in a lot of cases.
Another question that kind of popped into my mind as you were talking was, what about the people, or teams rather, that sometimes are just paralyzed? Something happens, maybe it's unexpected, maybe it was expected, but there are multiple pieces and they are in that mode of, let's have a meeting and talk about it, and then have another meeting to talk about that meeting, and have, your North American management kind of protocol. Is it better? I'm just going to ask a very blunt question. Is it better to do something and adjust along the way if it's not right than it is to do nothing?
Almost always. And if there's been some research a long time ago that I can't put my finger on it at the moment in my brain, but it's the successful companies make more wrong decisions than their less successful counterparts make decisions. So one of the things that I tell my clients, and one of the pieces of advice I give them when I'm in progress with them, is, if you're having a 1-hour staff meeting and you're at minute 23 and you have not made a decision already, or at least teed up a complex one that you're working on, then that's not a good meeting. Unless that was a one-off. But, so many times we find these staff meetings, people get together and North American management says, we have a plan and we get together and talk about how it's going. And so, everyone does a little sort of version of my part is okay, please look over there. And the boss tries to kind of figure out, which piece, who's telling the truth and who's kind of spinning it a little for me. And then the boss also has to figure out how does their work fit together and what do I see? And that's just not what's going on in iterative organizations. What's going on is they're getting together and if you work for me, you're saying to me, hey, look, boss, we're trying to go here together, all of us. Right now, part of my work is pulling us this way. I think we should do X, Y, Z right now to get those things back into alignment. Let's have a decision about that. There's some nuance to how you got on the agenda and to which decisions get made and how the decision gets made. But fundamentally, we're making more decisions per cycle and taking more actions per cycle. And so you have a lot less of that, hey, we all know there's a problem and we're talking about it. You have a lot less of that, hey, we all know there's a problem and we're not talking about it. And you have a lot more of like, hey, it's not at all weird. In fact, it's very normal for someone to bring an issue and for us to make a decision to fix the future, because we can't fix the past. And that's exactly what we need to have happen and then you make that decision and you fix the future, fix in quotes, and then you break something else and next week we'll fix that. And that's that step-by-step approach for sure.
So just to draw out one thing that you said there, high-performing organizations, many times you will find out that they've made more mistakes than they have correct things, because along the way they're doing things and they're adjusting and eventually they get to the right thing. And I'll go all the way back to that floor guy. When I started in my career, I was in the concrete block industry, and I worked second shift supervisor, and we had a hydraulic pump that quit working one evening, and it was three hydraulic pumps connected together. But the point was, one of them quit working, which meant the whole system wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. And so we called an electrician. The electrician came in and said, yeah, the motor's no good. It's not going to run. You're going to have to get a new motor. So we called to find out about getting a new motor. They said it was going to be 3 weeks. Long story short, we were in the middle of our busy season, and that was not something that I wanted to call my bosses and say, it's going to be 3 weeks. We got to shut this whole line down. So I'm looking for an answer. Mm-hmm. Now, most people would have just stopped there and said, it's going to be 3 weeks. We got to shut down. And that's that. So I had one thing in my favor. I had time. Everybody else was in bed. I worked second shift. So I worked throughout the night, and I probably made 100 incorrect decisions or tried 100 things that didn't work. And I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And eventually my mind allowed me to see that, oh, hey, that particular hydraulic pump is starting last. And so the first one starts, the second one starts, and then the third one starts. And because the first one and second one had already started, it was going backwards. And when it tried to start, it needed extra power to be able to get it to go, and it wouldn't start. So I reversed all the wiring around so that one started first. And lo and behold, when I started it first, it ran, and then the other ones kicked in. And we were able to run for a month until the new hydraulic pump came in. And I remember telling my supervisor in the morning, like, here's what I did. And he's like, you're a genius. And I said, well, not really, because I tried 100 other things before that didn't work. I mean, it's 5 a.m. and I'm still here.
Right.
But I remember to your point, and I've never heard someone put it the way you put it, but at the end of the day, it was just taking one step at a time, looking at it, learning something, trying something different, and continually trying something until I got to something that worked. I just refused to give up.
Right. And that's so if you take that at the individual level and put that at the system level and say, how do we get an organization to do that? The answer is not make a plan in January and then get together and talk about how it's going and scowl at anybody who says it isn't going well. The answer is get the whole system to keep trying things in coordination and keep adjusting in coordination, because the plan may not work, the goal may be wrong, and the information about that only comes in through action, right? You don't learn something until you do something and find that it's wrong. You couldn't have sat at home and done that same 100 steps. You had to do them. You had to execute them and find your way there. And that's what we don't see in a lot of organizations. We see this sort of like, I mean, if you study failed organizations, or I should say organizational failures, the most famous one is like the NASA Challenger failure, right? But there is a whole body of work. There's almost always somebody who knew and was trying to raise their hand, but the system wasn't listening for it. And that's what we know is going on in the best organizations, is the system is not only listening for one-off problems, but actually constantly making small corrections so that we have less big corrections, right? You don't have to do a diving save if you saw the problem coming and incrementally adjusted as you went along. You don't have to cancel the flight if along the way, as we did these tests that discovered the O-rings had problems with cold weather, we were adjusting O-ring material. It's only by marching to the plan for too long that you force yourself into these big decisions. And you did the exact opposite in that story. You took a bunch of incremental things and turned it into a result and probably saved your company a lot of money. So hopefully they recognized you for that, but that's great. Yeah.
So you emphasize, which you just touched on it a little bit, you emphasize in providing tools rather than theories. And I'm curious to know, from your end, if you were to take a workforce, I guess my question would really be, if you were to take a team and say, look, the world is your oyster and you can use any tool that's out there. You find the tools that are going to help you get the job done. And now obviously we need a good high performing team at this point, but would allowing them to be able to go out and find the proper tools that are going to aid them to get their job done and to be more productive and to feed information back to the system, so to speak, is that going to be more valuable than spending 5 days doing a strategic plan at the beginning of the year?
In my experience, usually, and I say that because strategic planning is not useful. It is useful.
I agree.
But there's a lot of attention on that. And what I find is there's very little. I mean, the feedback I get is that I'm doing a thing nobody else is doing. And so what I do is I have a couple classes and simulations and things that help people do this. But what I do that I think makes me have this job for 20 years now is I go work with an executive team. So let's say CEO and 2 levels down simultaneously. And in about a quarter, we shift how the company runs. And we shift it so quickly that clients report back and say, we were going faster within the first 2 weeks of the quarter. I just had this feedback from a client probably less than 6 months ago, who it's about a $600 million operation across 2 continents. And they tell me, we changed the leadership team's behavior so fast that we saw business results, quantifiable business results within the quarter before the intervention ended. Now, how fast do you have to change leadership behavior in an organization that size to actually see results? The answer is like almost instantaneously. And I'm saying all this because I think the combination of like social media publicity has kind of led us to this world where everybody has a thought leader and every thought leader has a model. And we're all kind of trying to say, my model works better than your model. And what I'm saying is, all the models are good, except for the bad ones, but I don't care about that. If I can help release the group intelligence innate in these people that you've hired, all at different times, all according to different criteria. I always laugh when one of my clients, one of the leaders says, well, all these people have the same problem. And I go, they were hired at different times. They were hired according to different criteria by different people. And they have all arrived at your leadership team and magically develop the same problem. That's not a them problem. That's a system problem. Now, maybe it's a you problem, or maybe it's a group behavior problem. It's usually a culture thing, but that's where that comes from. And so if we can fix those behaviors, they're not hard to fix if we know how, we can release this level of group intelligence that goes, we know what the problems are. We know what the solutions are. We know how to implement the solutions. What we need is to live in a system that's listening for information about the problems and that's allowing us to make decisions fast so that we can do that. And then, the other thing comes back is people actually enjoy themselves a lot more when they are having an impact on a daily basis instead of when they are coming to work every day with the same set of problems that they can't break loose of, not because they don't know what the problems are and not because they don't know the answers, but because the system won't allow it, won't listen to it. You can't bring bad news, or if you do, nobody listens, or you can't ever get a change approved, those kind of things. So that is, I think the key is, and I'm weird at this, I know, but I go, they'll find the models. You want to use RACI, you want to use some 4-box thing, you want to use SWOT, they will find the models when I release the group intelligence. And, of course, if someone comes to me and goes, we're doing an analysis, what tool do you recommend? I can look at what they're doing and say, well, this might work. But honestly, that's so secondary to group intelligence and a system that allows and encourages group intelligence instead of shutting it down.
And interestingly, my experience and what I have told people over the years when they're talking about what system to use, my answer is always the same, similar to what you said with one twist. It doesn't matter what system you use as long as your team is operating properly, but do something on paper. If you can't do it on paper, you're not going to be able to do it on a computer. And now, we're talking huge systems, but, I would agree that it's easier to use automated, but the most common thing we'll get is, calendar management within a team. How do we get better time management? And, the answer is, well, you got to do something. You can't
try a thing.
You can't do nothing. But my point is, if you can't merely keep a calendar yourself on paper, how are you ever going to get a team to put all their information in and be able to manage that, in a way? The other thing that I'm curious that you brought up, how important is it that a team has common language, common lingo? I have witnessed a few times where teams within a team, you have this group over here that were engineers and they have their engineering lingo, and you have this team over here that were originally floor employees in a manufacturing group, and they have that lingo. And then you have the executive over here, which came out of the finance world, and he has a completely different language. How important is it that a team have the ability to be able to communicate and have a common language, if you will?
I think obviously it's important. I think in my experience, what's most important, and this it hits home for what I do, because part of what's happening is once we're running the organization the way I'm talking about, where we're, we haven't talked much about cross-functional, but part of running to the higher level goal allows any team at any level to pull resources from across the rest of the organization to fix something that hits it at that level. And everyone will share because we're all held accountable to the higher level goal. It's not like, Amos and Ed have the same boss and it's Ed's goals versus Amos's goals. It's like, no, Amos and Ed are here for the boss's goals. So if we need some of my people to fix his thing and his thing is most important, I'm giving my people. So this issue of communication becomes important. What I have experienced is once we get the common language around, hey, it's okay to pull, people from the other organization. Here's how we solve problems together. I have some specific stuff around how we solve problems, how we make decisions. Once we get some basic common process language in place, and then once we get good at saying, like I said before, hey, this is the issue we need to solve this week. And what it usually looks like is, hey, boss, my piece has taken us this way, and I think we have to do this complex thing. And what the meeting decides is, you're the experts. Go off and figure out a solution and come back and recommend it here in 2 weeks. And so now we're going to get together and do a problem solving. So now, if this is a cross-functional thing, your point is exactly right. Like, I'm from one department, you're from another department, we're going to have different languages. If we have good problem-solving group mechanics, and if we have a good system that has clearly charted us to bring back this recommendation so we understand what we're there for, we're going to surface pretty quickly where are the language barriers, so to speak, right? Where are we speaking different languages? What do you know? What do I know? I have a model for group problem solving that talks about, we have to get the facts on the table before we start coming to solutions. A lot of models say that. But we're going to surface where the language is. And I say it this way because I think what you're saying is absolutely right. We have to have common language. And I think that statement often gets turned into we need a glossary for everybody, or we need a 2-day training on language, or it's like, no, we don't do communication top down. We don't do communication by equipping everyone to communicate and then seeing if they do. We do communication by going, here's a concrete thing to communicate about. Start. How's it going? What do you need to fix? And so it all becomes oriented around the outputs we need, as opposed to around sort of these initiatives around communication or whatever. And so I think again, what you're saying is exactly right. And I think the path there is through real output that we need to do as an organization.
I like it. I will say, though, on the glossary of terms, only once in my life, I would agree with you. You don't typically need that. But I was one of my clients was a quasi-government agency that was in the workforce development world. And when I first got involved with them, I would sit in these meetings and they had all these acronyms and different things. And I'd sit there just kind of scratching my head like, what are they talking about?
You might need it. I'm not saying you don't need the glossary. I'm saying if you do, the team will figure it out for sure. Yeah.
So hence, out of that, I came up with a new rule. When I go into a meeting with a group, like a new group, I tell them up front, no acronyms. You must use the full wording and description of whatever you're talking about. And but that's for me, not necessarily for them.
You're putting your finger on an important thing here, Amos, though, which is, I think one of the fundamental culture shifts that I make when I help an organization go from North American to iterative management is, if we're in this meeting to posture and fluff and talk about how good my area is going, and you're a new guy, I don't care too much if you understand me. So it's not going to occur to me to not use acronyms. And if you ask me not to, it's going to be a little weird. But if we're in this meeting to actually tap the group intelligence and make decisions, and you're the new guy, I'm going to explain my acronyms organically because I need you to understand me. And if you ask me, I'm going to go, oh, sorry, didn't think about that. Let me tell you what that is. So it shifts the whole system focus because what we don't want to do is we don't want to have you doing the right thing, which is saying, hey, I don't want acronyms. I want to understand, and have the system go, why does he want to understand? We do this meeting every week. He'll figure it out in 6 months. By then he will have learned we don't do anything here. We just get together and talk, right? So it's important that we have the system support, people like you who have the initiative, and people that have less initiative, the system should take them there anyway. Hey, we know when you're new to this team, there's a lot of acronyms. We did make a glossary, or, we're not going to use acronyms today, or whatever it is, so that we're drawing people and intelligence in, as opposed to creating these performative things where it kind of doesn't matter who's in the audience.
So you touched on cross-functional. You want to touch on that a little bit more of how that plays in and how that can help and aid a team, a high-performing team?
Yeah, so cross-functional it's everybody now, right? I mean, 20 years ago it was sort of limited to technology and a few other things, but now with the advent of software as a service and the way tech is supporting everything, we're all cross-functional. And sometimes it gets called matrix, and that's ridiculous because the matrix says we have an organization that goes down and then we meet across. But if you walk around a real organization, there's all kinds of crazy meetings of different people and different groups happening all the time. So the only rational way I know to understand this is through the lens of iterative management. And it is, here's Amos and Ed. We work for a boss. We're accountable to the higher level goals of the boss. We come together with the boss and the rest of our peers, and we look forward and we say, what's coming up, what needs addressing. When we discover an issue, if that issue involves both of our teams and one of our peers, those people will throw in information, or, I'll say, you can have my guy for that, you'll have your woman for that, and we'll put them together on this team with somebody else, and we'll make it all work. And we're contributing without fighting because it's the higher level good. In fact, if I'm a thorny sort and I'm inclined to be crabby about helping, under North American management, I'll say, you can't have my people, they're mine. Under iterative management, I don't get more friendly. I say, I can't believe there's this problem and I'm the one that has to help. Take this person, this person, this person. They're my best. I don't want us to fail. So I don't get nicer, but my focus shifts. And so what you have in that case is you have every meeting at every level. So now I work that way with my staff, right? They have to work together on my goals and on down, and you do too. And so every meeting at every level is constantly standing up and tearing down cross-functional meetings. They're called what I call task forces, which is come back in 2 weeks with a recommendation. Sometimes they're what I call working groups, which is, hey, here we are at the leadership team. We constantly have to stay with manufacturing issues that cut across manufacturing operations, sales, and R&D. Constantly have those issues. So we're going to charter a permanent team of those three groups. You guys get together, and issues that involve just those three functions, you rule on them first and only escalate them back to here if it's more than just you. So that's what I call a working group, and that's a standing group with resources and a charter. A staff meeting is a standing group with resources and charter. There's only two kinds of meetings. There's meetings with the standing resource charter, and there's meetings to solve a problem and come back with a recommendation. And those can be stood up or torn down at any time by a sponsoring meeting. Now contrast this with North American management cross-functional. Amos has found a problem. Amos has to figure out, who do I need to solve this problem? How much social capital will I burn to solve this problem? Can I get Ed to give me one of his people to solve this problem? How can I make it worthwhile to Ed? And will Ed do it? And then will I owe Ed one? And do I want to have that situation, right? So it's almost like we task the managers with inventing management instead of just doing it. And doing it is hard enough. So what we want is, no, Amos, I have a problem. Ed, I have a problem. We go to our boss, we say, this is the problem. We charter the task force. They go do it. They come back. We rule on the result, and we move on. And all of the attention is spent fixing the thing or deciding the thing or adjusting the thing. And none of the attention is spent on the politics and the social influence and I just took a class in cross-functional influence, so I'm better at it now. Oh, darn, my peer took the same class, so he's better at it also. So we're back in lockstep. All that craziness goes away, and we just have an organized system that's smart enough to stand up and tear down its meetings. That's the only rational way I know to do cross-functional meetings. The other approach is to try and sort of dictate them and decide what they'll be, and for the whole company, and you can't keep up. It's spaghetti. I mean, there's different people moving around all the time because there's a lot of decisions that need making.
That makes sense. And as I'm thinking about it, I know in my early career, there were times I needed somebody from somewhere else, and it was obvious that person said, well, I'm going to send the worst person I have rather than the best person I have because I don't want to give up my good person. And that makes perfect sense when you put it into that context. So before I forget, where, if people are interested and they want to reach out, where can people find out more about you, find the book, and get in touch with you?
Easiest place to start is the book site. So iteratenow.com. And in the upper right, there's a click that says accelerator. And if you hit accelerator, it will show information about that one quarter. Like, here's how we change your company in a quarter. I say that because I know that sounds a little unbelievable. And I often get these weird quizzical looks from new people that are talking to me, but I do it. I've been doing it for 10 years. It works. But anyway, there's also a link to buy the book. There's some links back to my bio. My company is Group Harmonics, so you can look up Group Harmonics as well and find me there. But I think iteratenow.com is the best place to start.
Awesome. Well, we always end every session with kind of a rapid fire session. I ask all my guests the same set of questions. I keep saying someday I'm going to put all of those answers together and publish them into a book and become a millionaire. Anybody that's already published a book knows that you're probably not going to become a millionaire, right?
Well, as far as I know, probably not. But try it. I'll be happy to be part of your book, Amos. That sounds great.
But the first question is, and this is a newer question. I've only been asking for a couple of months, but what is the single best piece of advice that somebody has given you throughout your career?
I'm going to say, don't be afraid to pay for good advice. I run a business myself, and I feel like, and I think this is true when you employ people as well. I feel like, in the times when you're trying to figure stuff out yourself, because you can, it's fine. But in the times where I've needed legal advice or accounting advice or marketing advice, I've always been better off hiring someone who had expertise.
Absolutely. I like that. Don't be afraid to pay for good advice. Second question. If we were magically able to get all of the school administrators from across the United States into one room, and you had a moment to give them just one thing that you thought would be helpful to add into a student's career that would help to turn out a better, well-rounded, more prepared for life student, what would that one thing be?
I'm going to say group decision-making, and specifically group decision-making in an organizational context. And the reason is most of what's out there on group decision-making comes from university research, which is strangers in a room once. And all of the trouble we have in management is trying to apply that research to managers, because if you and I are managers together, we have a history and a future together, and we are playing a game long term. I'll go with you on this one, you go with me on that one. And so I think really a working understanding of how to get groups to work well together when they're working together long term would be the thing I would say.
How would that change our legislature in the national arena? But that's a different conversation.
Can you imagine? That's a whole other podcast.
Yes, we won't go there. The next question is, throughout your career, what has been maybe your go-to book that you continually go back to get good insights out of?
Thinking of a number of them. There's one of the ones that iterative management is based on is by Rensis Likert, who did the Likert scale. Sometimes people call it the Likert scale, that 1 to 5 scale. That's from him. And that's what he's known for. But actually, he wrote books about kind of what does it look like when groups work together. And it's some of the early material that came out of behavioral research back in the 60s. And that feeds into what I'm doing. So I think I don't know if that's the one I go to all the time, but that's definitely foundational to the body of work that I sort of say I own and say I put together, and which is empirical, by the way. I don't own it, but I've kind of pulled it together from multiple sources, but that's been a big one.
Awesome. And the last question is, in today's ever-changing world of technology, what piece of technology, software, app, hardware, what piece of technology are you using that you find most helpful in your business?
I don't know if this is in my business, but I have often had the thought, so I've been doing this for 20 years, and around the time I started doing this freelance sort of consulting, there's a lot of travel. And right around the time I started doing it, we started to have devices that could navigate for us. And I still sometimes think to myself of my mentor and predecessor who's taught me a lot of this. I took over his business, things like that. He did this at a time where you had to call the client in advance and have some paper directions from the airport to your hotel. Just a whole different thing. And so I think that, that punch a button and get to your client, I think it's something we very much take for granted now, but I feel like that is a game changer, maybe more than anything else.
I would agree. I just a small funny story. I remember, and I just shared this story recently with a young person. And I said, I had a meeting in Tucson, Arizona. I flew into the airport late at night. I got my rental car and I got pulled over leaving the airport. And the cop asked me if I had been drinking. And anybody that knows me knows that would not be the case. And I said, no, I said, I was just looking at my map. And anyhow, this young person said, well, why were you looking at a map? You know, like, you mean you were looking at your phone? I said, no, I was looking at my map. And that idea to them that you had to get a map out and stretch it out and try to find your directions, was foreign to them. And anyhow, it's kind of comical.
I have a teenager and they'll say, well, where's the dot? How do I know where I am? This is stupid. It's almost like, we hear about the guys on the open sea, in the day in the wooden boats looking at the stars. It's like that. You have to just find where you are, like by reckoning, Yeah, that's how we did it until very recently.
Well, awesome. Ed, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with our listeners. I had a lot of fun, and hopefully maybe we can get you back on again in the future, but thank you so much.
Happy to come back, Amos. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Awesome. And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out our past episodes. Don't forget to give us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening, and follow us so that you get alerts whenever the new episodes come out. Until next time, we appreciate all of you.